Once she was an outcast. The villagers mocked her, shunned her, and cast her aside. They said she was worthless, cursed, unworthy of respect. For years her name was spoken only in laughter or in whispers of pity. But years later, when the village itself stood on the edge of collapse, when fear and chaos gripped every home, the same people who once mocked her gathered at her feet, begging for her guidance. The camera slowly pans across a dusty village road, children pointing and laughing, neighbors shaking their heads, elders turning their backs. A young girl walks alone, carrying the weight of rejection on her small shoulders. The narrator's words wrap the scene with emotion. They never imagined that the girl they scorned would one day return, stronger than they could ever believe. They never imagined that the one they rejected would become the very person they could not live without. The scene then shifts forward in time. Years later, the village square is crowded. Villagers whisper nervously, some in disbelief, others in awe. At the center of it all stands a woman, tall, composed, and confident. Her eyes no longer hold the sadness of rejection, but the calm strength of a leader. "Who is she?" someone murmurs. "That is the girl we once drove away." The atmosphere tightens. The villagers remember the cruel words, the mocking laughter, the day they turned their backs on her. And now here she was, not as the girl they abandoned, but as the woman they needed. How does an outcast rise from the ashes of humiliation to lead the very people who betrayed her? What gave her the strength to return? And what secret did she carry that silenced an entire village? The introduction closes on this sharp cliffhanger, leaving the audience eager to discover her journey, the pain, the transformation, and the power of her comeback. She was born into a family that the village never respected. Her father was a poor farmer, working long hours under the sun, and her mother had passed away when she was still young. Their small mud house sat at the edge of the fields, far from the decorated homes in the village center. From the very beginning, whispers followed her wherever she went. "That's the farmer's daughter. Nothing good will come from her." At school she tried to sit with other children, but they scooted away, covering their noses as if her clothes carried the smell of the soil her father tilled. During lessons, even when she answered questions with intelligence, the teacher's praise always went elsewhere, to the children of the wealthier families. Festivals were the hardest. While others wore bright clothes and danced in the village square, she stood at the edges, her simple dress patched in several places, her feet bare. Once she gathered the courage to join the circle of girls during a celebration, but before she could take more than 2 steps, one of them pulled her aside and hissed, "This is not for people like you." Laughter erupted, echoing in her ears long after the drums stopped playing. She wanted to help, to belong, but even her kindness was turned into mockery. When an old woman's basket spilled in the marketplace, she rushed to gather the fallen fruit. Instead of gratitude, she heard sharp words from the crowd. "Be careful. If she touches it, it's worthless." Humiliation became a shadow that followed her everywhere. Yet the most painful moment came one evening in the village square. A dispute had broken out among 2 families, and in her innocence she tried to offer a solution she had heard her father mention about sharing water from the well. But before she could finish, one of the men laughed loudly. "Who does she think she is? A leader? She's just a farmer's girl." The laughter spread like fire, burning her from the inside. She stood frozen, her face burning with shame, her voice drowned under the mockery of the crowd. That night, as she walked home in silence, tears blurred her vision, but something else stirred within her, a quiet, trembling flame. She told herself, "One day, I will not be the girl they laugh at. One day I will return and they will listen." Days later, with nothing but a small bundle of clothes and the blessings of her weary father, she left the village. The same villagers who had mocked her shook their heads and smirked. "She won't last a week," they said. But as she walked away, her heart carried 2 things, the deep scars of rejection and the unshakable determination to change her story forever. The road away from her village was long, dusty, and uncertain. She had no map, no money, and no clear plan of where to go. All she carried was a small bundle of clothes and the memory of the laughter that had pushed her out. For the first few nights, she slept beneath trees, using her arms as a pillow. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but pride kept her from turning back. When she finally reached the city, she believed life would be different. But the city was harsher than she had imagined. People rushed past her without noticing, her simple clothes marking her as an outsider. She tried to find work, washing clothes, carrying water, sweeping streets. Many turned her away with sharp words. "You don't belong here. Go back to your village." On days she managed to earn a few coins, she bought bread and water. On other days she went hungry, staring at food stalls she could not afford. The coldness of the city pressed down on her, yet she refused to beg. Every rejection carved a scar inside her, but each scar also hardened her spirit. One afternoon, after fainting from exhaustion near the market, a kind fruit seller gave her a handful of bananas. Instead of keeping them all for herself, she shared them with 2 other hungry children sitting nearby. That small act of generosity caught the attention of a shopkeeper who had been watching her. "You may be poor," he said, "but I see something different in you. You think of others even when you have nothing." It was the first time anyone had spoken such words to her. They lit a spark in her heart. Over time, she learned to survive. She worked as a helper at a small tea shop, cleaning tables and washing cups. The pay was little, but she watched carefully how the shopkeeper handled customers, how disputes were solved, how accounts were kept. She began suggesting small improvements like arranging chairs better to fit more people. To everyone's surprise, those small ideas increased the shop's earnings. "Where did you learn that?" the shopkeeper asked. She smiled faintly. "From watching, and from remembering how my father solved problems at home." Her ability to observe, analyze, and solve began to show itself. People who once ignored her started turning to her for advice in small matters. How to divide work fairly, how to calm quarrels among workers. Without realizing it, the girl the village had mocked was quietly training herself in the art of leadership. But life did not grow easier overnight. There were nights when she cried alone, missing her father and the simple fields of her village. There were days when she was cheated of her wages, days when she endured insults for daring to speak her mind. Yet each setback became a lesson. She learned courage when she stood up to a man who tried to take her hard-earned money. She learned patience when she went hungry, but still encouraged a crying child with a smile. She learned responsibility when she gathered a group of struggling workers to pool their coins and buy shared meals, ensuring no one starved. Little by little, she was shaping herself. Each hardship carved strength. Each rejection planted resilience. Each challenge polished her hidden potential. The villagers didn't know. The girl they had laughed at was no longer bending under their mockery. She was rising, forging herself into something greater. And though she did not yet know it, every struggle she endured was preparing her for the day she would walk back into that same village, not as the poor farmer's daughter, but as a leader they would all look up to. The city that once crushed her spirit slowly became her teacher. Each hardship had toughened her, but it was education that began to sharpen her path forward. At first, she could barely read or write, having left school early because her family could not afford books. Yet whenever she served tea to customers who carried newspapers or spoke of big ideas, she listened closely. Words she didn't understand she repeated silently to herself, determined to learn their meaning. One evening, she approached a local church where free evening lessons were offered to workers. She sat at the back, shy and uncertain, but her hunger for knowledge burned brighter than her fear. Night, after long hours of labor, she forced her tired body to sit through lessons in reading, writing, and numbers. Slowly, her world expanded. The teachers noticed her dedication. "This girl," one of them said, "has a mind that refuses to give up." They encouraged her, sometimes giving her old textbooks to study. While others gave up halfway, she stayed, determined to climb out of the darkness of ignorance. As months turned into years, she began to master skills beyond the classroom. She learned bookkeeping from the tea shop's accounts. She practiced negotiation when dealing with suppliers. She studied how leaders in the city organized communities, managed disputes, and built trust. What once seemed impossible now became natural to her. Her turning point came when she helped organize a group of struggling women who worked as laundry washers. Each one was poor, constantly cheated by middlemen. The girl suggested they form a small cooperative, pooling their resources and working together. At first, they laughed at her idea, but she persisted, drawing plans on scraps of paper, showing them how they could earn more and depend less on exploited workmen. The women began to make steady money. Word spread in the neighborhood. The young woman who once served tea now had ideas that could lift entire families. Community leaders started noticing her. She was invited to meetings, at first only to listen, But soon people turned to her for opinions. She spoke with clarity, her words carrying the weight of lived struggle. Her reputation grew, not because of wealth or status, but because people saw she cared deeply for others. Recognition followed. A small organization working with underprivileged communities offered her training in leadership and community development. She eagerly accepted, learning about public speaking, conflict resolution, and sustainable business practices. For the first time in her life, she stood before a crowd, addressing them not as a servant but as a leader in her own right. Though her name began to carry weight in the city, her village knew nothing. To them, she was still the girl they had mocked, the one who had left in disgrace. They had no idea that the girl they dismissed was now building networks, gaining allies, and laying the foundation of something greater. Every night, as she looked up at the stars, her mind drifted back to the fields of her childhood. She could still hear the laughter, still feel the sting of rejection. But now that memory no longer weakened her, and it fueled her. She whispered the same promise over and over. One day I will return, and when I do, no one will laugh again. Back in the village, life that once seemed predictable began to unravel. The rains that had always nourished their fields failed for 2 consecutive seasons. Crops withered, livestock grew thin, and the once bustling market turned silent. Hunger gnawed at the homes of both the poor and the wealthy, and fear spread like wildfire. The elders gathered under the ancient tree, but their voices carried no solutions. Some blamed the gods, others blamed the youth for abandoning traditions, while many sat in silence, weighed down by despair. The once proud leaders who had mocked others now looked helpless, their words offering no comfort. Merchants who had promised loans vanished when repayment became uncertain. The wealthier families who once boasted of their influence hoarded their resources behind locked gates, refusing to share with the starving. Day by day, trust crumbled and resentment grew. The people who had laughed together now quarreled bitterly, each household fending for itself. Soon whispers filled the village. Who will save us? Some placed hope in a neighboring chief, but when emissaries were sent, they returned empty-handed. Others turned to the government, but officials only made promises that never came. For the first time, the village realized that those they had always depended on were powerless. Children cried from hunger. Farmers stood in their barren fields, staring at cracked soil. The once joyful festivals were canceled. Drums no longer echoed in the night. The village that had once mocked a little girl now found itself mocked by fate itself. In the evenings, as fires burned low, conversations grew heavy with fear. If this continues, we will not survive another season, one elder confessed. People nodded, their faces pale in the dim light. It felt as if hope itself had abandoned them. And then rumors began to stir. Someone had seen a convoy of vehicles approaching along the dusty road. Others whispered of a well-dressed woman stepping out with a presence unlike anyone they had known. Who is she? Villagers asked. Some dismissed it as gossip, others clung to the possibility like a lifeline. The truth soon spread. The woman was none other than the farmer's daughter, the girl they had mocked, rejected, and driven away years ago. At first, the villagers refused to believe it. Impossible, they said. She left with nothing. She cannot be the one arriving in such grandeur. But as she drew closer, there was no denying it. Her face was the same, though sharpened with confidence. Her posture carried authority. Her clothes spoke of success, and her eyes, once dimmed by humiliation, now burned with determination. The village fell silent. People who once taunted her at the well now lowered their gaze. Mothers hushed their children, elders stiffened in shame, and whispers spread faster than fire on dry grass. It was in that moment of silence, as the villagers stood before their own disaster, that when all that you trusted fails, when those who once boasted cannot save you, what happens when the one you rejected returns carrying the answer you need? Suspense thickened like the gathering of a storm. The girl they had cast away was back, and this time, she held the power to decide whether to save them or let them drown in the consequences of their cruelty. The sun was setting when the convoy finally reached the edge of the village. Dust swirled in the air, and curious eyes peered from behind doors and half-broken fences. Whispers ran like wild fireflies. Could it really be her, the girl we once mocked? Then the car door opened. Out stepped a woman in a flowing dress that spoke of dignity rather than vanity. Her face was calm, her steps firm, her eyes shining with quiet authority. For a moment the villagers stood frozen, staring at the figure they barely recognized. "She looks different," one murmured. "No," corrected another. "She looks powerful." The farmer's daughter, the girl they had called worthless, was now someone they could not ignore. At first, the air was thick with unease. Some of the men shifted nervously, remembering the cruel jokes they had made at her expense. Women lowered their eyes, recalling the days they refused to let their children play with her. And the elders, who once declared she would never rise above her father's soil, sat silently, their shame etched into their wrinkled faces. Yet she did not arrive with bitterness or arrogance. Instead, she lifted her chin, scanned the desperate faces around her, and said simply, "Enough of silence. Your village needs solutions, not excuses. If you are willing to listen, I have a plan." The boldness in her voice cut through the doubts. People leaned forward, curious. Could this woman really bring what no one else had? Within hours, she set to work. She gathered the farmers under the shade of the old tree and spoke of new methods she had learned in the city. Irrigation systems that could conserve water, crops that survived even in drought. She shared blueprints and diagrams, speaking not as a beggar's daughter but as a leader who commanded both knowledge and vision. Next, she met with the traders. "Instead of hoarding," she said firmly, "you must create a shared storehouse. No family will go hungry while another eats in excess. If you refuse, you will destroy yourselves." Some traders grumbled, but when she explained how fair trade could attract buyers from neighboring towns, even the most stubborn men began to nod. Finally, she called the women together. She praised their strength, their ability to hold families together even in hunger. "It is time," she said gently, "for you to lead alongside your husbands. Together we will rebuild." Her words ignited something the villagers had not felt in months: hope. Of course, not everyone was convinced. A few whispered that her success in the city must be an illusion. Others doubted she had the resources to save them. But doubt began to wither as action replaced promises. The very next morning, she brought trucks of food, donated from allies she had gained in her journey. She arranged for engineers to dig wells, hired teachers to educate children, and even brought medical supplies. Step by step, her leadership shifted the village from despair to determination, and slowly, admiration replaced mockery. "She is not the same girl we knew," an elder admitted, but perhaps she was always destined to be more. Children followed her eagerly, listening to her stories. Women whispered her name with respect. Even the men who once ridiculed her now sought her guidance. The daughter they once mocked had returned, not to beg but to lead. And for the first time the village believed in her. For days the villagers watched her work tirelessly. She coordinated repairs, brought water to thirsty fields, and settled disputes with a fairness no one had seen before. But still whispers buzzed. How can she do all this? Where did she get the power? Who truly is she now? One evening, as the village gathered under the great baobab tree, she finally decided to tell them. "I left this place with nothing but pain in my heart," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You called me worthless, mocked me for my father's soil-stained hands, and cast me out like I was less than human. But I carried those wounds as fuel, not chains." The crowd was silent. No one dared to interrupt. She took a step forward. "In the city, I worked harder than I thought possible. I studied at night, learned from those who once looked down on me, and refused to give up. And slowly I rose. Today I stand not as the girl you once rejected, but as a leader recognized beyond these fields. Governments seek my counsel. Organizations trust me with resources. And yes," she lifted her chin, "I have wealth enough to change this village forever." Gasps spread through the crowd. Even the proudest elders bowed their heads in disbelief. "But understand this," she continued, her eyes scanning each face. "I did not return for revenge. If I wanted that, I could have left you to your suffering. I came back because this soil raised me, this village shaped me, and even through cruelty, I will not abandon it. I came to lift it." Men who once laughed at her now avoided her gaze. Women who had whispered insults felt tears sting their eyes. Children, who had been taught to mock her, now clung to their mother's arms, wide-eyed with wonder. One elder finally spoke, his voice trembling. We drove you away, and now you are the only one who can save us. Forgive us, daughter." She looked at him, the very man who once humiliated her father in front of the entire village. For a long moment the silence was heavy. Then she said softly, "I already forgave you. The moment I chose to rise, I let go of hatred. But do not forget this lesson. Greatness is not written in wealth or status. It can be born in the very dust you scorned." Tears welled in many eyes. The villagers bowed their heads, stunned by her strength, her grace, and the truth that cut sharper than any blade. The girl they once mocked was no longer just a farmer's daughter. She was their leader, their savior, and the living proof that rejection can be the seed of destiny. The following days brought a transformation the village had never seen before. Where there was once division, now there was unity. Where there had been hopelessness, now there was direction. And at the center of it all stood the girl they once rejected, no longer a victim but their leader. The council of elders, once proud and unyielding, gathered before her. One by one they placed their staffs of authority at her feet. The chief spoke with a voice heavy with humility. "From this day forward we no longer call you outcast. We call you leader. Guide us into the future." Her eyes softened as she looked at the faces bowed before her. She could have let pride consume her, but instead she chose something far greater. "I accept," she said, "not for myself, but for this village. Remember, the stone you once threw away can become the very foundation upon which a new house is built. Let us build that house together." Cheers erupted, though many still wept, some from shame, others from relief. Children ran freely, no longer told to avoid her. Women gathered to hear her words of wisdom. Men sought her guidance on rebuilding the fields. Slowly, the scars of the past began to heal under her leadership. She returned not to punish, but to heal. She forgave where others would have condemned. She built where others would have destroyed, and in doing so, she became more than a leader. She became a lesson. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting golden light across the village, the people stood united under her vision. But even in their joy, questions lingered. Would all accept her leadership, or would envy and resistance rise again? Could the wounds of years of cruelty ever truly fade? If your village cast you aside, mocked your every step, and drove you away in shame, would you return to lead them into the future? Or would you leave them to the fate they once wished upon you? Tell us in the comments, what would you choose? And don't forget to share this story if you believe that rejection can be the beginning of greatness.